In this next session, Professor Philip Schnieder will discuss the ways biosimilars are substituted by examining some different biosimilar substitution policies that are in use around the world. Some of these offer patients and their physicians a great deal of choice between different products and control over their treatment decisions. Others allow government or private insurers to dictate what biologic medicine a patient will receive.
This presentation is on substitution systems around the world. Recall that one of the controversial issues is whether biosimilar can be substituted for an originator biologic without the approval or the consent of the prescriber and patient. So we'd like to talk about different substitution systems around the world. Again, to familiarize you, the biologic medicine is a medicine made from large complex molecules that are grown in living cells instead of being made in a laboratory setting through chemical reactions. The biosimilar is a biologic medicine, but it's a biologic medicine that's highly similar in structure and function to another biologic medicine that's known as the originator or reference product. They are usually lower in cost, and while they're safe and effective, unlike generics, they're not exact copies. So the issue of substitution becomes an important issue here. So there's some terms that I'd like to introduce right now when we talk about this topic. One is automatic substitution. And this happens when a pharmacist can substitute one drug for the other without the physician approval. This is not too controversial with generic drugs. It's been widely accepted that the patient should be given the least expensive medicine in order to make responsible use of limited resources. But it's highly controversial with biologics and biosimilars because these aren't identical molecules. Another term we would like to talk about during this presentation is non-medical switching. And this happens when a healthcare plan, an insurer, and a government changes the biologic medicine selected by the patient and physician and substitutes a different one for reasons other than the patient's health. That is usually to save money. Or in some cases, in countries like the US, where pharmacy benefit managers or insurance companies are managing the cost of healthcare, it might be to increase profits for those companies. And sometimes there are relationships between payers and manufacturers that provide incentives to use a particular product without passing those savings on to the patient or to the healthcare system. So the non-medical switching program is basically taking decisions out of the healthcare professional and patient and putting those into organizations that have more of an interest in saving money or making money than they do in the care of the individual patient. Changing of treatment may change the control a patient has over their own condition. And the patient and the doctor often believe that they should have the final say about the treatment choice, which biologic to use, and if and when switching is appropriate. So let's look at how different countries deal with this around the world. The question is automatic substitution of biosimilars permitted? Now, we've done a review of different policies, practices in different parts of the world, including Western Europe. And what we found when we looked at policies in Western Europe, automatic substitution is extremely rare. The vast majority of European countries leave the treatment decision, including whether to switch to a biosimilar, with the physician or patient. There is an interest in saving money and making responsible use of limited resources. So physicians are often encouraged to prescribe lower cost products, including biosimilars. And physicians are more comfortable doing that in a newly treated patient. Sometimes they call that a treatment naive patient. But in Europe, even though physicians are encouraged to prescribe the lowest cost product and reminded of that often, the payer continues to pay for whatever product the patient needs based on the physician and patient relationship. And so this has ensured a robust and sustainable biosimilars market with multiple suppliers in a given product class, as we've seen in the EU. Some countries have taken pretty restrictive and aggressive approaches to try to reduce costs, one of which is Norway. And in Norway, there's a national tendering system. What that means is they put out a bid and will select for use on most patients the least expensive biologic that's available, comparing a reference or originator product to the biosimilar or more than one biosimilar. And so whatever the least expensive one is the one that they recommend for use. But physicians still retain the prescription authority to choose among the available agents. There's strong encouragement to use the lowest price product, particularly for new patients, but there's no requirement that they do that. And Denmark has a little bit more aggressive approach, but at the beginning of the process, they involved physicians and patients in making decisions about their reducing the cost of biologics and biosimilars, an agreement to use the least expensive whenever possible. But under certain circumstances, if the physician deems it necessary, the physician can use a product that's not the one that's been selected for primary use. The point here is that no European countries have stopped reimbursement for an originator product through arbitrary government fiat, or just by requiring physicians to use certain medicine. In Eastern Europe, automatic substitution is permitted. Each of these countries has different procedures. In Estonia, for example, patients can refuse to have what is directed, but they have to pay the difference out of pocket. In Latvia, patients that are not new patients can refuse to pay, can refuse the biosimilar, but they have to pay the difference out of pocket. The physician can prevent the substitution, and all others must use the least expensive product. In Poland, automatic substitution is permitted, but the pharmacist has to discuss this with the patient. And in Russia, physicians prescribe using the international non-proprietary name. If we were talking about simple molecules, we call that the generic name, like acetaminophen versus Tylenol. We'll talk about this more in a subsequent presentation, but substitution is permitted, but the physician can prevent this if they have a medical reason to do so. And patients can always buy a brand name product by paying out of pocket. There's two countries we'll take a look at more closely because they're being a little bit more aggressive in promoting substitution policies. In Australia, they permit automatic substitution called A-flagging of biosimilars, but the physicians can prevent this by writing brand substitution not permitted on the prescription. In Canada, the decision about or policies that are developed in individual provinces. And so some provinces have adopted a highly controversial practice called forced substitution, where patients must be placed on the least expensive medicine and no alternatives are provided to the patient or the physician. Let's take a closer look at the Canadian situation. Two provinces, British Columbia and Alberta, have had forced switching programs that have affected 50,000 patients who have been required to switch from their current medicine, the ones that the physicians prescribed originally, to a government-chosen biosimilar based on cost issues. And the policy in these two provinces is that the originator products will no longer be reimbursed, and only certain biosimilars are being reimbursed. And the rationale for this is to dramatically reduce the cost of care. But physician and patient groups have strongly opposed this, as you can see in the headlines on the right side of the screen. Two other provinces in Canada, Quebec and New Brunswick, have since followed this forced switching practice in these Canadian provinces. In Australia, in 2015, the health minister there announced that they would be the first country to allow automatic substitution of biosimilars. The recommendation came, though, not from their Therapeutics Goods Administration, the organization that regulates the safety and effectiveness of medicines in Canada, but rather Australia's Pharmacy Benefit Advisory Committee, which is focusing on what's paid for. And so as a result, the government listened to the Benefit Management Group, which has an eye towards economic issues, as opposed to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which focuses much more on science and safety and clinical safety. So physicians were offered the opportunity to prevent automatic substitution by checking a box, brand substitution not permitted. And they didn't think this would happen very often, but much to their surprise, the Australian Rheumatology Association advised their members to tick that box and say substitution is not permitted. And they found that the majority of physicians adhered to this. And not only that, but prescribing the medicine by brand name and ticking the non-substitution box to provide certainty about what medicine is actually provided to their patients. In the US, we have taken a little bit more rational approach to this, we think, or less controversial, and that is by determining which biosimilar is interchangeable and which ones are not. And this interchangeability designation, it allows for automatic substitution, and it requires additional testing. Studies have to be done to switch a patient from a originator product to a biosimilar and then back to the originator again. And they compare the patients, they study the patients to determine whether or not any difference in effectiveness and safety occurs in that. And if those studies show that no change in effectiveness and safety occurs, these medicines can be considered interchangeable as a biosimilar and be substituted. So as a result of that, we can enjoy the cost benefits of biosimilars, but it addresses the physician and patient's concerns that existed in Australia and is existing in Canada as they implement their policies. When they go to the pharmacy, the pharmacist may say, well, you're going to have to pay extra because this medicine is not on a preferred list. And that preferred list is called a formulary. And the formulary is the list of drugs that are paid for by an insurance company or for a government. And usually these are done based on arrangements with the pharmaceutical industry. And that can change based on what kind of arrangements can be negotiated from year to year. So as a result of that, patients may end up being switched every time there's a change in the drug list, and that's not desirable either. So we ask physicians how they feel about this non-medical switching by third parties, and you can see here that the majority in Canada, Europe, and in the US in these various surveys that we've done are not comfortable with third-party medical switching. About 60% of them say that's not something that they're comfortable with. And likewise, the physician feels that the physician and the patient should choose what biologic the medicine should use or whether or not to switch or not. There's very strong agreement around the world that it's very important or critical that the physician along with the patient decide what treatment options to choose rather than a third party that isn't responsible or accountable for the care of those individual patients. These data come from surveys that we've done around the world, and here you can see all those numbers. There's over 5,000 respondents of physicians in different parts of the world, including the US, Latin America, Canada, and Europe and Australia that have produced the results that I'm sharing with you. There are definitely concerns based on our survey results that physicians have about switching and maintaining their responsibility for prescribing biologics and biosimilars.
Thank you, Professor Schnieder, for that informative talk on substitution systems.